Hey everyone, welcome to a very special free bonus episode of Sleazoids. Jamie and I have thought about getting into the game of conducting interviews for a little while now, but we were waiting for an opportunity that really spoke to us, which is exactly what happened to us this week when we were offered the chance to sit down with writer and director Christian Gudegast, whose 2018 directorial debut, the LA heist film Den of Thieves, starring Gerard Butler, was one of our favorite films that came out that year, and whose long-awaited Eurocrime sequel, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, finally came out just this year and is already available to buy and rent digitally and will be available on physical disc later in March. If you're unfamiliar with either of these films, Jamie and I cannot recommend them enough, and the way that they incorporate trashy criminal dirtbag B-movie characterizations with really skillful and pragmatic tough guy mood and filmmaking craftsmanship. We sat down with Christian to try and learn more about his journey from UCLA hip-hop music video director to industry script polisher to becoming a hit director. We talked about his dad, the legendary actor Eric Braeden, his deep passion for and knowledge of old and even foreign heist and crime movies like RIFIFI and RONIN. And we, of course, also got into some of the nitty-gritty logistics of researching real heists, working on and developing the Big Nick character with Gerard, marketing the films and their cult following, composing the electronica soundtracks, and, of course, also shooting the show-stopping heist, car chase, and gunfight finales, which are among the best you'll see at the multiplex these days. So without further ado, here's Jamie and I's conversation with Christian. Enjoy.
You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
These streets, they're different. They're old. The ties are deep and hidden. It's where the East claws at the West, where the South seeks the North. There's honor here that must be respected. Rules that cannot be broken. And if a mistake is made, only blood is paid.
So if it's okay with you, we'd actually like to start with your journey kind of leading up to Den of Thieves. We read that you grew up in Westwood in LA and would sneak into movie theaters back in the day. And I was curious just what one of the first films was that you snuck into, if you don't remember the first one, and why you were so intrigued that you just had to break the rules and get in there.
I can tell you the first one I really remember was Jaws. And then like Kentucky Fried Movie, and then Woody Allen, Manhattan, Raging Bull, Apocalypse Now, saw the Cinerama Dome. That was not in Westwood, but Westwood at the time was the highest concentration of movie palaces in the world before the multiplexes, whatever. But the movie that really changed everything for me was The Shining. I remember seeing the trailer of just like the elevator door cracking and like the blood gushing out in slow motion, then like it rushing down the hallway and then moving all the furniture and then just covering up the lens, and like I'm like, what the fuck is this? And then saw the movie, and it just completely blew me away. Those steady cam shots, and I just became obsessed with movies from that movie on, and just knew that I wanted this, what I wanted to do for a living. Then I went to UCLA Film School, and then and in order to graduate, you also had my film won best film there, and also in the at the time it was like I forget what the competition was called, but it won like the national best film award that year in 1992. And then we also had to write a script to graduate, and my first script I wrote with my old writing partner Paul Shearing called Black Ocean, and we sold that to Oliver Stone. And then that totally, I was doing some hip hop videos at the time as a director, and then but that totally changed my sort of career trajectory, and started writing scripts, and then was fortunate enough to like sell basically almost all of them. and then got involved in script doctoring and rewriting, and that paid the bills really well. And then, but the problem with that,
I was kind of curious about that. You did a lot of uncredited writing. Is there
tons?
Like, what,
and
are you allowed to say which stuff it was, or is it like top secret?
I think you're not allowed to, but fuck it. I mean, from the Rundown, Speed Racer, Immortals,
the Wachowskis.
Yeah, I mean, on and on and on. I mean, all kinds of shit.
Right. Very cool.
And then, but the problem that was great for, financially was wonderful. But that just got me further away from directing, which was always the goal, right? It was always to be a filmmaker, writer, director. And then I set it up at Relativity, and then it was going to be made in like 2008 with Wahlberg, and then with Sam Jackson, then with Dwayne, and then with Stallone, and then Sam Worthington was involved for a while, all kinds of guys, and it just never got made because Relativity was just kind of, I mean, I did a lot of stuff with them and I loved them, but they were kind of a mess, and they went bankrupt, and then it took a while to get out of bankruptcy court. So it almost seemed to delay my directing career by 8 to 10 years, that whole boondoggle, but we finally got it done, which led us to Den 2, and now we're off.
Yeah, was it a difficult process getting, people to maybe start to trust you behind the camera rather than just, but this he's been behind pen and paper, we want to, did they ever try to like convince you to get someone else to do it, and you were like, no, this is mine?
No, actually, no. And the reason why is because I've been a photographer my whole life. And then I did a documentary that I directed that blew everybody away called Shot Caller. So what I do with everything I do that I direct. So on Den 1, for example, I went and again, all the characters are based on actual people, and all the locations in the script are based on actual locations. And so I would basically go out in the world and I would shoot it with still photographs. I would shoot the characters, shoot the places. And so I had then a lookbook, but I shot it with the exact lenses and, film stocks that I want to shoot the film with. And the whole look of the film was very clear in this lookbook. It was 250 pages
like,
long.
This guy's got the vision. He's the one.
And so you're like seeing 1 through frickin' 100 and whatever. And you could literally go through the lookbook and go page by page and see the character and see everything and go, oh, it's just basically just animate, the lookbook, and that's the movie. It was that thorough. And then I had all the, the technical advisors and real people that it was based on, and I could, introduce the actors to them. And so it wasn't it was just very, very thoroughly prepped, I guess is the word. So I didn't have that issue in that sense, but that just is a function of just having done the work, really.
We talked about oddly enough your dad actually on the show a couple times, just because he's a great actor, and he showed up on specifically The Ambulance by Larry Cohen. We recently looked at, and we were just curious if there was any.
We are fans.
Yeah, you guys are going deep. You guys are going.
Yeah. We were just curious if he gave you any inspiration or guidance or anything like that before you were starting out in the film industry, kind of at your beginnings.
I mean, a little bit, but not like his life is completely separate from his work. I mean, completely. He doesn't socialize with anybody from the business. He's basically an athlete meets an academician. He was going to be basically a university professor. And he was in LA and working as a busboy and playing professional soccer. And then he went to UCLA, and then he worked as like a valet parker, and casting people would see him and they'd be like, man, you should be an actor. So he just started going out for roles, and he would get them every time. And so he was a poor immigrant student, and then he started making money as an actor. I was like, God, this is great. And then, it took him about 10 years to realize, God, I guess this means I'm an actor. I mean, he never even planned on doing that. It just kind of, and he was just naturally good at it. And next thing you know, that's what he's doing. So, but it's really my mom is really the, just loved cinema, and was really into like Fellini and all the French New Wave. And, she had very sort of sophisticated cinematic taste, and she would take me to the movie theaters when I was a kid all the time. She'd drag me to everything. She'd take me to Fellini movies or Woody Allen and, all that kind of shit. So I saw everything from like Raiders of the Lost Ark to, the latest Antonioni, The Passenger with Nicholson, so I saw like everything. and she would like talk about the movies with me, and she was really into that. And then the practical side was my dad was in the business, so I'd visit him on set sometimes, and the few guys he was friends with were like stunt coordinators and like cameramen, kind of like crew guys. So I grew up around those dudes, and of course, the time growing up in LA, everything was shot in LA. So it almost felt like, once a month going to school, we couldn't go to our classroom because they were shooting some TV or show or movie in it. You know what I mean? So you're always around the business in that sense, right? So it was very, very familiar to me in that sense. Yeah. What was it? I digress. What was the original question?
Basically, just if he gave you any advice or inspiration, but it seems like it's kind of like the surroundings helped a lot.
Yeah. And it was more, he was always, supportive of me being a filmmaker, because he knew that's where the power lied. You know what I mean? And that you can self-initiate. You don't have to be chosen by somebody when you're an actor to be cast in something. So
yeah, we actually didn't even realize until we saw him on. We looked you up and we saw him on Facebook sharing a photo of you and Gerard. He was very like a proud dad post, being like, "Look at my kid making his movie today," and we thought that was just adorable.
Yeah. He was always totally supportive. So yeah,
very cool. Speaking on the first Den of Thieves, which Jamie and I obviously were very big fans of, and it gathered a lot of attention in our kind of dorky cinephile circles based on the fact that I think a lot of people were like, this is being released in the kind of historically trashy January movie season. You have Gerard Butler in it, but it seemed like almost everybody, us included, were just taken off guard by the fact that there was a lot of clear passion and care and, skillful craft. And that's not to say we're people who go through the depths of B movies all the time looking for incredible talent and skill. So it's not to say that those things are, anemic to each other or anything. But we were just kind of curious if, like the sort of reaction to the film or the online sort of cult following your movies have started generating was something you were tuned into at all, or people had been telling you about, or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we became aware of it, of course, and that's totally cool. But you just set out to make the best movie you can and let the chips fall where they may, right? The audience, you find an audience, and that's awesome. So, but I can totally see why. But it's a funny thing. It's like where Jerry was in his career then. If it was, Josh Brolin when he was almost in it, or somebody, it probably would have had a different vibe leading in, but would be the same movie, but somehow would have had like, it would lose that kind of B movie thing, whatever, like going in, right? But then you see it, you realize it's something else. So that's often a function of just kind of the casting, how it's marketed, you know what I mean? Regardless of the film itself, it's just kind of like what they were really leaning into the urban thing at the time. I remember I'm like, well, guys, I never considered it an urban movie. I'm like, yeah, it takes place in a city. I mean, and there's a black guy in that movie. Is that urban? Okay, I guess, I'm just trying to make an authentic crime film,
Yeah, but and specifically too, you do seem to have a very good feel for the kind of vulgar dirtbag kind of criminal side of LA that maybe you wouldn't normally see in a little bit of even a similar sort of genre milieu that you're operating in. And I'm assuming that comes up from, people you grew up around, but can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Just comes from the research. I mean, they people talked a lot about Den 1 and Heat, and ironically, I wrote the outline for Den 1 before Heat was I even knew what he was. So the similarities are kind of ironic in one sense. I love Michael Mann. And I remember when I saw Heat, I'm like, wow, this is like you bring such scope to this, genre, and it was amazing. But at the same time, I remember thinking, it's funny is he's not from LA, and therefore he doesn't really, as a filmmaker, doesn't really, maybe, I don't know if it's by design or not, can't speak to it, but that wasn't the reality of the world of crime in LA. I'm like, I knew that world, so I knew the people involved, and, the stuff they wore and where they lived in Malibu, and, it's just, that's not the world. It was a very stylized version of what crime and cops and robbers are in Los Angeles. And I knew the real world, of it. And I wanted to show that side, and I knew the actual.
These guys are working out in their garages wearing tap out shirts, and
I mean, 100. And that's what it is, and it's like, and I wanted to capture the reality of the world, like Scorsese would do back in the day in New York with, Mean Streets, etc. So, and I knew that world intimately. So it's just really about capturing it. Right. And then, yeah.
I guess one of the major characters that is kind of capturing a side of that is Big Nick. Gerard Butler's performance is pretty unbelievable. I mean, it's so entertaining watching him do the trash talking dirtbag cop. He's so vulgar but charismatic at the same time. Can you talk about the writing for the character and working with Gerard on such a character? Also, was there anything he brought to the character that wasn't necessarily on the page? Was there kind of a collaborative effort on that front?
I mean, it's both, right? I mean, everything was on the page, right? And the character was based on people that I knew, and it was, sort of mixing some people together. And I didn't set out to write anybody vulgar or a bad good guy or a good bad guy. I'm just writing people, and based on people that I met, and this is what they're like, and no judgment. This is kind of how they roll, and that's just what it is. So, I don't look at it like, oh, he's vulgar, or, Merriman's cold, or that's just those dudes. Take it or leave it, good or bad or indifferent. I don't judge them at all. I just find them fascinating as human beings, regardless of what they do. I don't care on what side of law they're on. When you spend time in that world, it's like a world, right? Cops and criminals, right? It's like a symbiotic relationship kind of thing. It's like they all know each other. They often go to the same kind of gyms and bars and restaurants, and they're aware of one another, right? But they only exist because the other exists. So I find that really interesting. And then I just sort of explore the reality of who these guys are, and that's just how they end up being. And then Jerry, when working with him, he loved the specificity of the world, the specificity of the character. He and I would talk a lot. We went to so many dinners before leading up to the movie. I mean, for a couple of years, and I drove him through the world to introduce him to all the cops. And he really saw the actual world that we were inhabiting in the movie, the reality of it. And he hung out with these dudes, and it was just about bringing that to life and just trying to keep it as honest and authentic as possible. And he just brought such a strength to it and a vitality to it, and he just fucking went for it. But again, we weren't trying to go for anything crazy or vulgar. We were just trying to be honest and just, this is what it is, and that was it. And that was really the mandate. It's like, let's just be authentic and let chips fall where they may. And that's what ended up being.
And I do find especially with the second one, we get to dive more into Big Nick as a character, and not that you don't see his more vulnerable side in the first movie, but it is very interesting to just go deeper with him in this one.
He's such a powerhouse whirlwind going into a scene and just totally changing it. And I feel like in the second one, you do give him some more opportunity for some pathos, even though he does have some humorous moments. I think a lot of people have been talking about the fuck NATO on ecstasy at the club as just indicative of the Big Nick character. But speaking of which, we would love to talk to you a bit about developing the sequel, obviously Pantera, and taking your American actors over to Europe and to France, and obviously all kinds of surrounding countries as well. And there's obviously a long history of heist cinema that goes back to some of those, the pioneering crime filmmakers who went on to inspire American crime filmmakers. We actually recently just did an episode on Jules Dassin's Rififi and Jean-Pierre Melville's Le Cercle Rouge, which, to credit you, was inspired by your
10 times before. I mean, Rififi and Le Cercle Rouge were like that, those are like my favorite movies ever. And I literally had everybody watch them, and that was like on like the homework list for everybody,
Oh my God.
And Rififi was really about the silence. I'm like, the whole thing about the heist and Den 2 is it's got to be about the physical. And again, this is all research. I had like the law enforcement officers that ran the Diamond Police who did the investigating the heists that were walked into the vault, just like the concierge does the movie. Like those cops were there with us the whole time, as were the thieves the whole time. Both sides were there the whole time,
and the real thieves too.
Yeah, the whole it will leave.
Oh my God,
there'll be a name, but like we were all there together the whole time, and
that's very cool.
The thing that was impressed upon me to all of us was just the physical reality of these heists, the physical strain, like holding your breath, learning to breathe, to not like make too much sound, to be silent, to move quietly through these spaces, the sweating, the isometric tension. You're sweating your fucking balls off, you know, and like it's hard, it's long. You have to be quiet. And like we wanted to really lean into that. And that's RIFIFI, right? It's like just the little this little movements and like dialing on the, you know, dialing on the vault and like all that kind of stuff, right? It's like it's all about the sound, the lack thereof, and cutting between environments, right? From silence to noise, and from like the cheering in the bar to the silence inside the, you know, when they're robbing the place. And like it's really about the silence, the quietude, that movement through that space. That's really what we were focusing on. And in terms of the world, it was just like, okay, we're taking Donnie, and now Donnie's a fully realized Donnie, where he's no longer pretending to be somebody he's not. He's a full-blown, fully realized gangster. And then Nick, who's never been to Europe, right? And we're taking this American T-Rex and we're throwing him over to France of all places. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And then, you know, spending time with, you know, the Diamond Police themselves and all those guys over in France and Interpol and everything, you know, there's a, you know, cops flex, you know what I'm saying? That they flex, like, you know, in America, the classic thing of FBI versus local law enforcement. Well, all that stuff is real, you know what I mean? And so what would it mean if a guy like Nick goes to Europe and like meets these guys and he's, you know, kind of, you know, flexing a little bit, and they're going to flex back like, hey, motherfucker, you're in fucking our hood now, you know, and what are those scenes like? And there's a lot of fun to be had with that. Right. And then between Nick and Donnie. And so I knew that, you know, and as we go forward to Den 3, Den 4, and we're probably going to do a prequel to Den 1, you know, it's every time, yes, it's a crime film, action, those things, you know, we'll check those boxes, but I always want to bring something new to it. You know, and like we knew in Den 2, it's going to be, okay, it's going to be a buddy movie. That's going to be like the other layer. Right. Den 3 is going to be like another thing, right? So we always want to bring like another genre, you know, kind of to make it different, not just so it's a standalone film within the larger sort of lore of, you know, the larger story of the franchise, right? But we want everyone to kind of, each one to kind of stand alone as its own thing. So what is that new wrinkle we bring to the, you know, the heist genre, really? That's the basis of it. So that's where all that.
Yeah, well, and what you did with those characters really reminded me of, speaking of, we were talking about Michael Mann, but when Michael Mann took his Miami Vice characters and he was like, what if those guys were on like a tactical globe-trotting, you know, style thing environment you've not seen them in, when he did his kind of movie version of it, and also having that sort of undercover identity crisis kind of pathos to it and everything like that. And you made I wanted to ask you made a filmmaker, I think you called it, trailer, or a final trailer for the film that eventually came out. And I sat there and I watched it and I went, how was this not the full trailer, or the real trailer when it came out? Because it kind of gave me that vibe. But that was when I went, am I going to watch a guy doing like Miami Vice things in here? I was like kind of blown away by that. I
mean, look, boy, how do I answer this? Look, there's a push pull, one always has, with the studio, right? And like look, marketing a film these days that's going to go in the theaters is, in their defense, is no small task, right? Like, how do you get people to go to the theater? How long in the theaters for? Like, when do you go to streaming? Like, that whole balance, that is a balancing act, and you know that's a difficult math to figure out these days, for sure. And they did an amazing job marketing it, but you know, as often happens, like when you're in the marketing of a film, it doesn't always necessarily isn't perfectly representative of like maybe the movie itself. It's like you're marketing it towards an audience. So to do that, you kind of, you know, steer things in a certain direction. But we really also wanted to have, and we cut that very early on in post with my editor. And we wanted to do something to show them like, this is what we feel is the closest representation of the vibe, the energy of the movie. You know, this is, and they loved it. And then, but you know, it was, you know, they had to do their thing too. And so then that's how we ended up, you know, releasing it. And we did it later, called The Filmmaker. So, you know, where everybody was happy, everyone got their say, and we were able to sort of, you know, check different boxes. And, you know, marketing a film these days is not easy at all. You know, it's like, how do you get convince people to go to a movie theater these days, man? It's hard. And they did a great job. They're very, very good at what they do. So
very cool.
But as selfishly as the filmmaker, of course, you like the
you want to control the vibe.
Yeah, and but I look, everyone's approach to it is understandable and is all very educated guesses, right? So the campaign ended up as it did, and it was great.
Yeah
Very cool. I wanted to oh no, Jamie, go ahead.
I saw that you were not just obsessed with heists, but you're also very into martial arts. And we on the show talk about martial arts films all of the time. I saw that you were, I think, a black belt in jiu-jitsu. You also do Muay Thai. So I was just curious if you were planning on including any martial arts elements, maybe not necessarily in Den of Thieves, but in films in the future, or even Den of Thieves, just because it seems like you have a real interest in it.
Yeah, I mean, I've trained in combat sports my whole life. My dad boxed. I started boxing when I was 7. So my beef with movies is that fights are so seldomly real. And I'm not really talking about martial arts movies. That I'll put that in its own. But I'm like real world. Like the best fight I'd seen in a movie was probably in Goodfellas when Pesci and the guys jump Billy Bats in the bar. I'm like, that's what a fight looks like. That's what it is. Stomping and that's the reality of it. But to answer your question, yes, I am actually going to do the story of Hoist Gracie winning UFC 1. Yeah,
awesome.
So to answer your question, I'm going to do the most definitive. We
were wondering about the UFC guys who populated the character universe of Den of Thieves a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I was never a professional fighter, but trained. I competed in boxing while young, and then I competed quite a bit in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back when it all started in the 90s. Just, very familiar with the whole MMA world. We trained with those guys all over the world. And yeah, so, and I find that a lot of them have amazing energies and faces and looks, and it's just about getting them comfortable in front of the camera, get them to perform. And if you can, I think it's, look, my movies take place in very tough worlds, and to get guys like that to be able to perform, in my movies is great because they're naturally representative of what the reality of the world. So that's why I've cast a lot of those guys, and they've all been amazing, all been wonderful. And even Surreal Ghan, who played very shortly, played the Islamic, bodyguard from the Walla guy who brought the information to the Octopus boys in the scene in the cafe. He was unbelievable. I mean, what a talent that guy is. I mean, that guy could do with his eyes closed. I mean, he's like crazy talent. There were a few scenes we had to cut out of the movie he was in. He was amazing. Rika Verhoeven was amazing. Michael Bisping, Vitor Belfort, he'll be more in Den 3. He's a good friend of mine. They're all, the key with them is to get them to not play tough, because if a tough guy plays tough, it feels over the top. It's get them to play against that, but it's wonderful to work with them.
Yeah. I assume that making a film around these kind of long and elaborate heist sequences means there's got to be a lot of control and planning. But I was curious how collaborative your set is despite that. And it's like, do you prefer sticking to your initial vision, or do you like having some room for, just on the spot creativity kind of thing? Or how do you go about that?
Good question. So, well, the collaboration really starts when I'm writing the script, because I bring in all my technical advisors ahead of time. So I'm leaning on them as I'm writing, and I'm having them give me notes to the scenes that I write as I write it.
Is this possible? I feel like is probably a recurring one.
Yeah, but I know that it is going in, right? Because it's all based on real heists, right? So I'm basically, all I'm doing is kind of like picking and choosing and stacking real moments from real heists that I've done research on and putting them together. And it's not really, I'm not making anything up. It's all the real deal. And then my advisors come in and they sort of, a few things we had to update the technology. And all the technology at Den 2 is all real. And we actually work with the actual companies, like the Quantum Stealth, for example. And we were going to get some of that product, and we couldn't because they had just been contracted by the Department of Defense. And like the Ronin helmets in the opening, those were the world's first Kevlar, bulletproof helmets. And we work with that company from Japan, and like all the technology is real. So that collaboration's happening while I'm scripting, right, while I'm writing. And then, so by the time we're there, we're pretty locked in, but we're all locked in together. You know what I mean? Like we all know that's, and then if really the improvisation happens with performances with the actors, right? So like they're allowed to change whatever the hell they want, is like, it's usually they end up sticking to what's written, 60, 70, 80% of the time. But if we have time, I'm like, we'll say, hey, forget that. Let's do something completely different. Whatever you want to do. Maybe we have some ideas. Like, why don't we try that idea you came with before? Let's add that to it. And that happens a lot, and then often you cut that into the scene. Usually the scene ends up being a combination of what was scripted and then what was added on the day. You kind of, mix it together. But it's just about finding the best moments. And like, if, best idea, wherever it comes from, whether it's the script or just right there on the day. Awesome. And sometimes something you realize when you're there is overwritten. You're like, fuck all that. 10 lines become one line, or some things aren't said. You're like, this is interesting. Why don't we like play with that a little bit more, right? Like when the Panthers meet Donnie for the first time and they get in that argument at the end, right? Like that was that we knew there was tension there, but then we're like, we should play that a little bit more, right? And so that was all improvised, right? That argument that carried toward the end of the scene, right? Like they just let that rip. That was great. That wasn't on the page. But a lot of scenes were exactly as written, like the whole scene in the ocean when the octopus takes him out, Zaba out on the ocean, they push Donnie in the water, he and Nick are swimming back, and that's all like exactly as written, like exactly, just kind of go through scene by scene, but like, there are other things that you find on the day, that's great.
Yeah, speaking of sequences that seemed quite elaborate and like you would have had to stick pretty carefully to your planning, I wanted to ask about staging the big electric Porsche chase gunfight finale, because obviously just the use of the tunnel, the diegetic car sounds, the tactical maneuvering of guys like hanging out of the cars and stuff. It reminded us of when we talked about John Frankenheimer's Ronin on the show, and we were like, if we're going to talk to him, we need to know what the process of actually shooting that was, and was it as difficult as it appeared to be?
Okay, all very good questions. First of all, I worked with Frankenheimer when he right around before he passed away. So I had the honor of working with him. He was amazing. Ronin's a big influence of mine.
Oh, wow.
And Ronin was a big comp for this movie. Ronin was one of the things we all watched before. And Frankenheimer was an amazing man. I loved working with him. He was a mentor of mine, in his final years there. I loved him. So that sequence was like the shootout in Den 1 was very carefully choreographed and planned out way, way, way ahead of time. And I always do tons of training with my technical advisors. So they train the actors. So we, like on Den 1 with that shootout, we practice it over and over again, right? In like warehouses where we have all the space, and like we really drill that down. And the whole point of that sequence was to very accurately portray what a vehicle-to-vehicle gunfight, tactical gunfight looks like. And you have to be very careful with your windshields, right? Because you can't just shoot through the windshield, because if you're driving at spiders that you might not be able to see. So, and then also when rounds hit glass, they move around, so they become much less accurate. So you fire around like we do in the scene. You puncture a hole and then stick the muzzle into the hole and then fire from there to ensure that your rounds are being fired accurately. So all those details we put into the script and then into the scene itself. And then in terms of shooting it, we knew that Terry, my DP, and we wanted to shoot it much differently. We don't want to have the rigs on the outside of the camera. We want to be inside the cars with these guys, but then we have to have the actors driving. Then that, of course, becomes dangerous, because we went onto these roads that were very dangerous and very steep, 1,000-foot drops and like fucking hairy as fuck. So Porsche, and we did something never been done before. There's never been an action scene shootout done with electric cars before in a movie. So we put the actual electric cars. So Porsche was our partners. They were incredible. They brought their head engineers down there to Tenerife for months and months ahead of time, and they rewired the cars and put all the controls on the roof. So they had a pod on the roof of the car. So the stunt driver was on the roof, so we could have the camera inside the car with Jerry and with O'Shea and with Salvatore and with all the guys, so we could be in there with them and they could perform and do the scene. And we could have the camera on the roof. Like we took the windshield out, we popped it out, and we put a big plexiglass thing on the bumper, so it would block the air. And then we would strap the camera operator down onto the hood, and he would have like the camera all handheld like right there in the car with him. I mean, it was crazy.
That's crazy.
And that's how we shot that scene. It was very original the way we shot it. But there was obviously, we had to be safe, and it was dangerous. The roads were really,
I was
really,
going to
really
ask, how did O'Shea and Gerard react to like having an actual stunt driver on top of them, ripping them around dangerous roads? I
mean, again, like it was hairy, but like, it's just practice, right? It's just reps. It's the prep, you just do it a lot, and then the stunt guys were up the actual roads all the time. And then the final stunt, when we crashed the Porsche, we did that in one take. We had the best stunt drivers in the world. And like, if he messed up, like the guy's dead. I mean, I was terrified. I'm like, dude, are you sure you guys? Like, dude, I got this. So I'm like, look, if you don't got it, tell me. Like, let's just forget it. Like, we'll figure something out. Like, no, we got it. And he got it in one take. It was unbelievable. But the pods were, and Porsche really, without their help, we couldn't have done it. They were incredible. Like their engineers were down there. They did it all. They invested in the film, all that. They gave us all the cars, all their manpower. And they were amazing, and like they really made it possible. It was their engineers that made it possible. Period. And then the stunt team, of course. And then it just took, not to sound cliche, but it was a true, team effort. Everybody, came together to make that happen. We wanted to do something really special, and we were able to pull it off. Thank God. So it was super hard to shoot. And a story about the tunnel. So the tunnel we ended up shooting in wasn't the tunnel that we scouted. So we had a little bit of an issue in Tenerife with our location manager guys who are from Madrid, who went down there. And Tenerife was an amazing place to shoot. Wonderful crew, wonderful people, great island. We loved it. But they're not as used to shooting movies down there. So we scouted this tunnel that was 3 kilometers long. So we had like 45 seconds of a take from action to cut was like 45 seconds, which is perfect. We get through the whole scene. The actors could maybe run the scene twice, and we had enough runway to shoot it, right? Well, what neglected to happen somehow, I don't know how, but the local authorities weren't aware that we're going to be shooting firearms. And they're like, oh, you can't do that there. So 5 days before we're shooting there, we lost the location. It was a fucking disaster. And so while I'm shooting, like after shooting, I had to race down, run around the island, try to find some place, and they found what we ended up shooting in. But that wasn't a tunnel. That was an overpass, it was like going underneath a road that went to the port. It was 7 seconds long, going 80 kilometers per hour. That's it.
You had to shoot that in 7-second bits
from
put it
action
together?
to cut was 7 seconds. So in the beginning, the actors would forget, be like action, and like Donnie would have the first line. He's kind of getting into it, look around the windows, pretending like he's driving, and be like, cut. I'm like, Shay, brother, I love you. We got 7 seconds to do this, dude. I go, I hate to tell you, got to get in, like when I say action, 0.2 seconds later, you got to get the first line. And understandably, everybody was like, what the fuck, so it made it kind of weird, but we managed to do it somehow. And it was all about shooting it, we pulled the car at first push, and where we were in the tunnel, and we had to get real fancy and tricky with it. It was really difficult. And so we constantly reset. And so that scene ended up being a little more cutty than I wanted it to be. I wanted to be like less edits necessarily, but that's just the hand we were dealt, and we did the best with it and turned out to be great. But that was a massive, massive production challenge at the time. And we all had a heart attack. We're like, are you kidding me right now? So that was a nightmare. But we pulled it off.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things you do in the sequel that we wanted to ask you about too was the electronica soundscape soundtrack. Obviously, Den of Thieves, the first one, had one as well, and obviously this is a sound that works really well for this genre milieu. Tangerine Dream we've talked about a lot for Thief and Sorcerer. But how closely are you working with the composers for your films, and what was the difference between, say, working with Martinez, who obviously did the incredible music for Refn's Drive, and Kevin Matley, who I think this was our first time hearing music by him, but we were pretty impressed by it?
So I'm extremely involved. So I used to DJ back in the day, and I'm a big electronica guy, and actually worked with Ulrich Schnaus, who's now Tangerine Dream, quite a bit up to Den 1, and Tangerine Dream is one of my all-time favorites, and and Vangelis, and like in the Blade Runner soundtracks, and like Midnight Express, and
Giorgio, I assume.
Giorgio Moroder and Vangelis and Tangerine Dream, and all that shit's just incredible. John Carpenter's stuff he did back was amazing. So worked very, very closely. Kevin Matley was made aware by my producer Tucker. He did a little movie called Concrete Cowboy with Idris Elba, and he he said, you got to meet this guy Kevin, because I was going to use Cliff again, and then I was going to go with some guys over in Europe, basically certain DJs that were going to sort of collaborate and do the soundtrack, but they'd never done a movie soundtrack before, where I was kind of excited about that idea. And then I met Kevin, and we had this exact same taste in music, exact same taste in movies. And I told him what was interesting is not all, I'd say 80% of the score we did before we even shot the movie, which is kind of crazy. But like, I don't like score to picture as much. Like, if that can feel kind of like guiding, like feel this emotion right now kind of thing. I like it more ambient, moody, as opposed to like an exact, like right now, feel this way, So we talked about at length and talked about, references, and they talked about certain tracks and, this artist, that artist, a lot of Tangerine Dream shit and movies and everything. And just really the energy and the mood and the vibe. And then he went off and just kicked me like half an hour of just riffing of like one long kind of, piece of score that was so badass. I'm like, bro, I mean, just so moody and ambient, cool. And then so that was it. Then I hired him, and we worked really closely together. And Kevin's amazing.
And did you both know you were going to be using M83 to end the movie when you started as well?
I wanted to use M83 the whole time at the end. And, there's not a lot of source music in the movie. Like there's some, not tons. But I always play source music as like practical, like coming from a radio or in a car stereo, like coming, or like in the scene in the Panther Garage, that sort of rap battle, music battle thing they got going on. Like I always play that as practical, right, coming from a specific source. And then, but yes, I knew the M83 we wanted to end on that, and that vibe kind of reverse engineered, sort of the how we approached a lot of the soundtrack, the score. And just, Kevin really captured the mood of the place and the time and just the vibe of the movie, he did an incredible job. And like his stuff is just beautiful. It's just really like vibey, so yeah, and we'll always have that in the Den franchise. We'll always have an electronica based kind of score always.
We look forward to the rest of them.
Yeah, the next one we got already got some cool things going on, cool things brewing, going back to more of the Tangerine Dreamy sorcery kind of shit. So yeah, like Antonioni the Passenger.
Oh my God,
Sorcerer, like
Big Nick in The Passenger sounds like a dream movie to me.
Right. Yeah, it's there's gonna be some cool shit. We're gonna go a whole different world, man, like a whole different continent on this planet. Yeah, it's gonna be cool.
Oh, that's cool. Very exciting. Yeah, and I know everyone's been kind of asking you about the sequels, and Den of Thieves 3 is coming out, right? Like that's in production and everything. Yes. So that's incredibly exciting. I was just curious if it
won't happen until next year, because we're all doing something in between, but that'll happen in 2026.
Okay, perfect.
Not release, production. So
gotcha. So you like it's gonna be rough, but it's more like a 2027 release, possibly 2026. It's I mean, I know it's up in the air, but Cool.
2037. Yeah, exactly.
I was curious though about some of the other projects you have going on. I heard from one of your other interviews that you have something kind of like almost a big epic passion project called Black Flag, or possibly could be kind of like a pirate epic. And also you have something where you're working with S. Craig Zoller, which we're big fans of his. So that both of those sound exciting. I was just wondering if you could talk about them at all, or anything else that you're working on.
Yeah. So Black Flag is a pirate epic I wrote years ago with my old writing partner, Paul Schering. It is based in the 17th century Indian Ocean. It's based on the East India Trading Company and true story of a guy named the Pirate King of Madagascar. And it's sort of Master and Commander meets like Apocalypto. It's very like, almost like a documentary style. If you were to shoot a documentary in the 17th century.
You're saying the right movie names for us.
So that's that. And then the other big one that's will be coming down, next, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 movies. This thing called Berserker, which is a Viking epic, which is my sort of Braveheart I researched for years and years. And it's about the Vikings that go to Constantinople to Istanbul. It's about a clash between Vikings and Mongols, the precursor of Genghis Khan, a guy named Bat-Kaidu Khan, and involves the Holy Roman Emperor of the East. And it's a love story, and it's Viking period piece epic. And then the Craig Zoller thing is a thing called Empire, that is like an action comedy, sort of like Midnight Run, Lethal Weapon, maybe a little bit of The Rock, not quite, but a little bit, Okay. And it's that's with Jerry also, and it's set in New York, and it's about a terrorist takeover of a building in New York, and it involves the fire department in New York and police department, and it's fucking hilarious.
Awesome.
And it's great. So that's that. We may be shooting that later this year.
Oh, that's very exciting. Very exciting.
Very cool.
Yeah. That'll be much more fun. That'll be like just a fun, super anti-woke, and not to be anti-woke, but it's just very real, and cops and firemen talking shit in the streets of New York during a very tense situation. So you can imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I feel like that sounds great.
Yeah, it's great. It's really good.
Before we wrap up, we had one last thing we just wanted to ask you, because as someone who very clearly is very knowledgeable about so many of these different types of movies you've grown up on and whatnot, our listeners are all the time looking for recommendations. Is there a particular movie that you feel like is maybe underseen or underloved, or has maybe inspired you in ways that aren't as obvious as the ones that critics are always telling you about, that you would recommend to some of our listeners?
Yeah, we can go through. Let's see here. Well, the original Wages of Fear, the Sorcerer is based on, is amazing with Yves Montand. Then like I love John Carpenter. I love, like, more recent, I'd say like Sexy Beast.
Incredible movie.
Incredible. The Pusher trilogy.
Oh yeah.
And number 2 with Mads Mikkelsen, I find that absolutely brilliant. It's like Shakespearean. I find it fucking brilliant. Mad Max 2 or Road Warrior.
Love it.
Like the new ones are like whatever. They're super creative, but like I like that the original Mad Max and Road Warrior are just incredible. Like Road Warrior is like that's one of my all times, right? Then God.
I know it's hard. We get this too sometimes, where they're like, "What are your favorite movies?" And we're like, "Can I name you 100?"
Yeah.
I know it's so hard.
I was actually curious if you had any. We also run on the show kind of every once in a while. We'll get into more kind of extreme horror or extreme, crime stuff that gets very, very gritty. Some audiences would even possibly call it tasteless or something like that. Is there anything that gets onto the extreme side for you that you enjoy, or do you kind of draw the line at a certain point?
Is the question kind of inspired by the fact of you're doing something that Zoller was involved with, who is a huge extreme, guy? Yeah,
totally. Not really. I appreciate it. But I don't like. They're not like the top of my list. I'm seeing pretty much everything, but like they're not like that it's something that I want to that inspires me to do something similar. But I loved like Halloween 1 and 2 and like all that kind of shit. And like I saw the Terrifier movie, whatever, like that. But not less so. Obviously, of course, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an amazing movie. Right. Dude, it's incredible. Like The Hills Have Eyes, the original Hills Have Eyes is great. And Assault Precinct 13, the original, fucking badass. You know, I don't know if that qualifies, but
there's a little kid that gets shot in it. I think so.
yeah, exactly right. A little girl. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
God, I could go on forever if I really think. I mean, shit.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm sure you're doing a lot of these today, but thanks so much for carving out some time for us. We had a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yeah. This
likewise, my pleasure. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys very much.
Appreciate you. I hope you have a good rest of the publicity day.